Thomas Reed, a Millionaire CEO known for his cold logic and spotless record, thought nothing could surprise him anymore, until two 8-year-old twins walked into his office holding a stack of crayon drawings. Their message? "We draw well. We know how to help. We want to save Grandma. Please." Mia and Noah had nothing but their art and a quiet determination. They didn't ask for money, they asked for work. Their grandmother was dying, and they'd walked across the city just to reach him, convinced he was the one person who could help. What Thomas didn't expect was how these children would open wounds he thought long buried, and how a simple ring from their backpack would unlock the truth about a past he never stopped grieving. What do two brave kids, a dying grandmother, and a long-lost family connection have in common? Everything. Stick around, because what happens next will restore your faith in a family, love, and second chances. Subscribe now for more powerful, emotional stories that could change how you see the world. The receptionist was about to ask them to leave when the little girl, no taller than the desk itself, cleared her throat and said, politely but firmly, "We're here to see Mr. Reed." Her twin brother, equally serious, stood beside her holding a worn manila folder thick with papers. His shoelaces were untied, his jacket slightly too big, but their eyes, those unwavering, hopeful eyes, were impossible to ignore. In the sleek, glass-walled lobby of Reed & Harrow Investments, no one had ever seen anything quite like this. Most visitors came in Armani suits or power heels, armed with data sheets and agendas. But these two walked in off the street, jackets damp from the light spring rain, and left the receptionist speechless. When Thomas Reed's assistant reluctantly buzzed his line and described the situation, she fully expected him to decline. But after a long pause, his calm voice replied, "Send them in." Thomas Reed, 56, was a man who moved through life like a sealed vault. Handsome, polished, emotionally impenetrable. A pioneer in urban redevelopment, he had reshaped downtown skylines and toppled more than a few titans in his rise. Yet, the moment those children stepped into his sunlit corner office, something in him shifted. Mia approached his desk first, laying the folder down with a kind of solemn dignity far beyond her 8 years. "We made these," she said softly. "We want to work for you." Thomas blinked. "You want a job? We don't want free money," Noah added, carefully opening the folder to reveal page after page of hand-drawn sketches, colorful portraits, scenes of animals, people laughing under trees, flowers curling out of cracked sidewalks. "We can draw. We can help with things. We'll work really hard." Thomas remained silent, flipping slowly through their work. The drawings, though simple, held something honest, raw and unfiltered, like a direct line to the heart. He turned one over and saw a line scribbled in uneven handwriting. "We draw well. We know how to help. We want to save Grandma. Please." That last word, it wasn't just a plea. It was a surrender. Thomas leaned forward. "Where are your parents?" Mia looked down at her shoes. "It's just us and Grandma now. She's in the hospital. Her lungs are bad. We tried to keep her warm this winter, but..." Noah took over, his voice more forceful. "We have to do something. We don't have money for medicine, and the landlord says we have to leave soon. So we thought, you might let us help. You're important. You could do something." Thomas stared at them, his throat tightening. Important. He hadn't felt important to anyone in a long time, not in the way that mattered. He'd built empires, sure, signed deals worth billions. But this was different. These children weren't asking for charity. They were offering something. Effort, heart, hope. He stood, walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows behind him, and looked out over the city he ruled. "How did you even find me?" Noah shrugged. "Your name's on the billboard outside the building. We saw it when we walked through the park. You walked here?" "It wasn't far," Mia said quickly. "Just a few blocks." "More like 12, Noah corrected, not looking at his sister. "We started after breakfast." A silence stretched between them. Then Mia added quietly, "It was our last packet of noodles." Thomas turned around slowly. The air in the room had changed. The weight in their voices, so calm, so resolute, clashed painfully with their sighs. He sat again, his voice gentler now. "Do you have somewhere to go back to?" Mia nodded. "A room at the boarding house on Ellis. But they said if we don't pay by Friday, we'll have to leave. We think we have until then." Thomas tapped a finger on his desk, thinking. "May I ask your names?" "I'm Mia. This is my brother, Noah." "And your grandmother?" "Her name is Helen. Would you be willing to take me to her?" Noah hesitated, then nodded. "If you promise not to scare her, she doesn't like hospitals. She's been real tired lately." Thomas smiled faintly, surprised by how that smile came so naturally. "I promise." As they gathered their drawings, Mia turned to him. "Thank you, Mr. Reed, for listening." He paused. "No," he said softly. "Thank you for reminding me what that means." In that moment, Thomas Reed didn't feel like a CEO. He felt like a man waking up, for the first time in years. Thomas followed them. He didn't call a driver. He didn't ask for a coat. He simply stepped out of his towering glass building into the misty gray of the late afternoon, walking alongside two children with worn sneakers and unspoken purpose. The rain had turned from drizzle to a soft, steady fall, beating on his tailored shirt and soaking into the cuffs of his slacks, but he barely noticed. Mia clutched her drawings tightly against her chest, shielding them with her jacket. Noah led the way, eyes fixed ahead, jaw set like a boy who had decided long ago he couldn't afford to cry. Thomas had never walked these streets on foot, not like this. Not since before the fortune, before the private elevators and black-tinted SUVs. The sidewalks of Eastwood Avenue weren't part of his world anymore, but they had once been. He could feel the truth of that in every crumbling corner. They turned left onto a quieter block where storefronts sat half-closed, windows fogged with age and rain. Outside a laundromat, an elderly man smoked in silence. Across the street, a teenager wrapped in a hoodie balanced a tray of hot dogs for sale. Life here moved slower, heavier. Mia tugged on Thomas's sleeve gently. "We're almost there," she said, her voice barely above the whisper of the wind. Noah suddenly stopped in front of a tiny bakery. The smell of sugar and warm bread drifted through the door as a delivery truck pulled away. "She used to work here," he said. "Our grandma, when her cough wasn't so bad." Thomas looked through the window and saw a tired young woman sweeping behind the counter. The place was quiet. He imagined Helen, frail, proud, maybe humming to herself as she baked. Something about the idea stirred something deep in his chest. "She'd bring home scraps sometimes," Mia added. "Day-old muffins. She'd tear them in half and give us the bigger piece." The words hit him harder than he expected. "Where is she now?" Thomas asked gently. "The hospital," Noah answered, "but not the fancy kind." They kept walking, past a rusted playground, past boarded-up windows painted with fading murals of doves and children. The sky was darker now, the rain slickening the sidewalk until it shone like glass. When they finally arrived, Thomas found himself staring up at a tired brick building, its sign flickering weakly. East Haven Medical Center. It wasn't a hospital in the traditional sense, more a shelter with IV drips. The front desk was unmanned. A vending machine buzzed faintly nearby. Noah led him through the maze-like halls with confidence, like he'd done it too many times. Room 207. That's where they stopped. "She sleeps a lot now," Mia whispered, "but we tell her everything." Noah opened the door. Thomas stepped in, and for a moment he couldn't breathe. Helen was small beneath the hospital blankets. Her gray hair framed a face lined with both wisdom and wear. A plastic oxygen mask hissed gently with each labored breath. Her skin looked papery, pale. Mia crossed to the bedside and placed the drawing folder next to the pillow. "Grandma," she said softly, brushing Helen's forehead with care, "this is Mr. Thomas, the one we told you about." Thomas moved slowly to the edge of the room, struck silent by the scene in front of him. He had seen people on the brink before, in hospital wings and private suites, but not like this, not with two children so bravely holding her hand. "She used to sing to us every night," Noah said, his voice suddenly trembling, even when she started coughing. Mia looked up at Thomas. We don't want her to die. That's why we came to find you." The raw honesty of her words cut through the air like a blade. Thomas knelt beside the bed, his voice low. "I'll help," he said. "I don't know how yet, but I promise I'll do everything I can." Mia's eyes welled with tears. "Really? Really?" he whispered. Noah reached into his jacket and pulled out something small, 2 wrinkled dollar bills and a handful of change. "We tried to save up," he said, placing the money beside the drawings. "It's not much, but maybe it helps." Thomas blinked away the burn in his eyes. He couldn't look away from that small pile, coins earned by tiny hands and silent sacrifice. He stood and turned toward the hallway. "We're not staying here," he said firmly. "Come with me. All of you." "Where are we going?" Mia asked, her voice cautious. "To get her the care she deserves," Thomas replied, "and to give you to a place where you don't have to be so strong all the time." Noah hesitated. "Can she come with us?" "She'll be transferred immediately," Thomas said, already pulling out his phone, "to the best hospital in the city, and you'll be there with her." As he made the call, arranging for private transport and a team of specialists, Mia took Noah's hand. "Do you think it's really going to be okay now?" she whispered. Noah looked at Thomas, who stood by the door like a man carrying more than just wealth, but hope. Real, tangible hope. "Yeah," Noah said, nodding slowly. "I think maybe it is." The ride to the hospital was quiet, save for the rhythmic hum of the ambulance engine and the soft beeping from Helen's portable monitors. Thomas sat across from the twins, watching them hold their grandmother's hands tightly as the paramedics worked with professional calm. He didn't speak, not because he didn't want to, but because for the first time in years, words felt too small for the moment. When they arrived at Crestfield Medical Center, one of the best private hospitals in the city, the twins' eyes widened at the gleaming glass entrance and the lobby that shimmered with white tile and natural light. It was a world they had never seen before. "Is this really for Grandma?" Mia asked softly, staring at the polished floors like she might leave muddy footprints. "For all of you," Thomas replied gently, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You're not alone anymore." Helen was wheeled away into the care of specialists as a nurse explained the next steps: immediate diagnostics, respiratory therapy, and full supportive care. The hospital spared nothing once they saw Thomas Reed's name attached. It helped, certainly, that he was a major donor, but tonight he was just a man trying to make something right. While waiting in the family lounge, Thomas glanced at the twins. They had curled up together on the long couch, Mia resting her head on Noah's shoulder, both still dressed in thin jackets soaked from earlier rain. They hadn't asked for food, or toys, or even for him to stay. They just sat there, waiting, trusting that their world wouldn't fall apart this time. He cleared his throat and reached into the vending machine, returning with 2 hot chocolates. As he handed the cups to them, Mia looked up at him with wide, serious eyes. "Why did you help us?" Thomas sat down slowly beside them, searching her face. "Because no one helped me when I needed it," he said quietly, "and because I should have known someone like you existed." Noah sipped from his cup. "You're rich, right?" Thomas let out a soft chuckle. "Yes, I am." "Then why did you stop to help us? Most people just walk past," the boy asked, his voice tinged with the painful wisdom of being overlooked too many times. Thomas looked away for a moment, his jaw tightening. "Because your drawing stopped me," he admitted. Because I saw more courage in your letter than I've seen in most boardrooms. And because—" He paused. "It reminded me of someone I lost." He didn't say more, and they didn't ask. Later that night, the twins were given a private room with 2 small beds beside their grandmother's recovery suite. Thomas stayed. He declined the offer of a hotel room or a chauffeured ride home. Instead, he took off his jacket, rolled up his sleeves, and helped the nurse adjust Helen's blankets. "She's stabilizing," the doctor said, pulling off his gloves, "but she'll need time." Mia nodded like a soldier. "We'll be here. You won't have to fight this alone anymore," Thomas said again, quieter this time. Just as they were settling into the hospital room, Mia pulled something from her backpack, a worn little velvet pouch. She opened it carefully and revealed a tarnished silver ring, the kind etched with time. She placed it gently on the nightstand beside Helen's bed. Thomas leaned closer. His heart stopped. The ring had a tiny indigo stone, slightly chipped at the edge. Around its band, barely visible now, was an inscription, "Come back to me, Dad." It was the exact same design as the ring his late son, Matthew, had custom-made 15 years ago. A ring Thomas had paid for, engraved himself, and given as a symbol of their reconciliation, just weeks before the car accident that took Matthew's life. His breath hitched in his throat. Noah noticed. "Are you okay?" Thomas slowly sat down. Where did that ring come from?" Mia looked at it. It was always Grandma's. She said it was a gift from someone kind, someone her daughter loved once. Thomas blinked. "Her daughter?" Noah pulled a photo from a sketchbook. "That's our mom," he said proudly. The photo showed a young woman, arms around the twins as toddlers. Her eyes were unmistakable. Deep, thoughtful, kind. Thomas's hands trembled. That was Sarah. Matthew's college girlfriend. The girl who used to come by their house with sunflower drawings and jazz records. The one he hadn't seen since Matthew's funeral. He thought she had moved on. He never knew she had been pregnant. Never knew the life his son left behind had found its way back to him through 2 children with hearts too big for their age. His voice faltered. "Do you know your father's name?" Mia shook her head. "Grandma never said. She just said he loved our mom, but something happened and he never came back." Noah added, "But she said he gave that ring to her. That means he cared, right?" Thomas couldn't speak. All he could do was nod. That night, when the twins had fallen asleep beside Helen's bed, Thomas stepped out into the corridor and dialed a number he hadn't used in years. "Samuel," he said when his longtime attorney picked up, "I need you to run a file. Her name was Sarah Bennett. Died about 6 years ago. 2 children. I need everything you can find." "And what should I list as the reason for inquiry?" Samuel asked. Thomas stared through the hospital window at the 2 sleeping forms curled beside a woman who had carried their legacy this far alone. "Because I think I just met my grandchildren." Thomas sat at the edge of the hospital's rooftop garden, the city skyline glittering around him. The wind pressed gently against his back as if urging him forward, while the memory of the twins' eyes and that worn silver ring held him firmly in place. He hadn't slept. He couldn't. The pieces of a life he never knew he had were falling into place faster than he could make sense of them. He thought of Matthew, his laugh, his stubborn defiance, the arguments they'd had before the accident. And Sarah, the girl who once brought sunshine into his son's life, the girl he had quietly dismissed, believing she didn't belong in their world. But she had. And now, 2 children bore not just her spirit, but Matthew's blood, his legacy. His phone vibrated. It was Samuel. "I found her," the attorney said softly. "Sarah Bennett. Died 6 years ago from a pulmonary embolism, shortly after giving birth to twins. The father listed was unknown." Thomas gripped the railing. "No marriage record?" "None. She lived with her mother, Helen Bennett, in a small apartment outside the city. Medical records indicate she had no contact with the father after conception. No lawsuits, no letters. Thomas exhaled. And the kids? Are they officially under state protection? Temporarily. Helen filed for emergency guardianship after Sarah's passing, but it was never formalized due to her own declining health. If you want legal custody— I don't want custody, Thomas said, interrupting. I want to know them. I want to protect them. And, if I can, give them back something that should have never been taken from them. Samuel paused. Then you'll need to file a formal petition. I will, Thomas murmured, then added quietly, and Samuel, thank you. Back in the hospital, the twins were awake, sitting cross-legged on their shared cot with the coloring pages spread between them. Noah looked up first, face brightening. Did you sleep at all? He asked. Thomas smiled. Not really, but I'm used to that. Mia handed him a folded piece of paper. We made this. He opened it and saw a drawing of a house, 2 kids, and a tall man with the silver-streaked hair holding hands with them. A woman, Helen, he assumed, stood smiling nearby, her oxygen tank scribbled with care. We want you to be in our family, Mia said seriously, her eyes locked on his. Grandma always says family is who shows up. Thomas didn't trust himself to speak. Instead, he kneeled down beside their cot and gently pulled both children into his arms. Then I'll keep showing up, he whispered, for as long as you'll let me. A nurse stepped in and smiled at the scene, gently clearing her throat. Helen's awake, she announced. They rushed to her room. Helen lay propped up by pillows, her frame still fragile, but her eyes alert. When she saw the twins, her face crumpled in relief. Mia. Noah. They rushed to her bedside, each taking a hand. Helen's gaze flicked to Thomas. You must be Mr. Reed. I am, he replied quietly. She studied him, and something passed between them. Recognition, memory, maybe regret. I knew one day someone would come, she said, her voice raspy. Sarah always believed the past would find a way back. Thomas stepped forward. You cared for them, all these years, alone. They gave me purpose, Helen whispered, and I tried to give them everything I could, but I knew. One day, I wouldn't be enough. You were more than enough, Thomas said, gently placing his hand over hers. Tears welled in her eyes. Sarah never told me who their father was, but when I saw your name on the twins' papers, I recognized it. I wasn't sure, Sadi, but that ring— Thomas nodded solemnly. It belonged to Matthew, my son. Helen closed her eyes. He loved her. She never stopped loving him. They sat in silence, the weight of lost time pressing heavily into the sterile hospital room. Mia broke the stillness, holding up the picture again. Grandma, we drew this, with Mr. Thomas. Helen looked, and a small smile curved her lips. He has kind eyes, she whispered. Later that evening, as Helen rested, Thomas asked the twins if they'd like to come stay with him for a few days, just until Helen felt stronger. They hesitated. What about Grandma? Mia asked. She'll be just down the road, Thomas promised, and we'll visit her every day. Noah tilted his head. Will there be pancakes? Thomas chuckled. I make terrible pancakes. Mia smiled for the first time in hours. Then we'll teach you. As they rode together in Thomas's black SUV toward his spacious home overlooking the river, the city lights blinking like little promises, Thomas glanced in the rearview mirror at the 2 sleepy heads leaning together in the back seat. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but tonight, in the quiet hum of a car filled with something that felt suspiciously like hope, he allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, he'd been found again too. Thomas Reed had spent decades building towers of glass and steel, properties that touched the sky and overlooked the heartbeat of the city. But nothing prepared him for the silence of his own home, once 2 small voices filled its echoing halls. The moment he unlocked the front door to his penthouse overlooking the Charles River, Mia and Noah paused on the threshold, wide-eyed. Mia's hand tightened around her brother's. The marble floors gleamed. The modern furniture looked more like art than comfort. "You live here alone?" Mia asked cautiously. Thomas nodded. "For a long time, yes." Noah tilted his head. "It doesn't look like a place where kids are supposed to laugh." The words struck deeper than Thomas expected. He knelt beside them, his voice gentle. "Then maybe it's time to change that." The first night was awkward in the most human way. Thomas, for all his business acumen, had no idea how to set up two small beds, let alone properly tuck children into them. He burned microwave pizza trying to be spontaneous and dropped an entire carton of orange juice on the floor. Mia tried to clean it up, sighing dramatically while muttering, "He really doesn't know how to live." Noah giggled until his stomach hurt. That laughter, it did something to Thomas. A spark, a shift. He hadn't heard it in his home in years. Later, as the children sat in their pajamas on the couch watching an old cartoon, Thomas stood in the kitchen, leaning against the counter with a cup of tea, watching them from a distance. His gaze softened as he saw Noah rest his head on Mia's shoulder, and she instinctively pulled the throw blanket over both of them. He whispered to himself, "Matthew, if only you could see them." The next morning, Thomas drove them to the hospital. Helen was doing better. Stronger, after a night of real care and oxygen that didn't sputter out mid-sentence. She was surprised to see Thomas back so soon. "I promised we'd visit every day," he reminded her. Helen smiled faintly. "You keep your promises. That's rare these days." After some small talk and reassurance, Thomas offered to take the children out for the afternoon, just the three of them. They chose the botanical garden, a place Helen used to bring them on rare sunny days. As they strolled among flower beds and glass greenhouses, Thomas noticed how much Mia took after Sarah, sharp-eyed and quietly observant. She'd stop and study each sign, reading out the Latin names of the plants as though decoding a language meant only for her. Noah, meanwhile, darted ahead, his sketchbook in hand, pausing every few feet to draw butterflies or fountains. "Do you always carry that with you?" Thomas asked as Noah showed him a half-finished drawing of a tulip. Noah nodded. "Mom said drawing is how we keep people alive when they're gone, so I draw her favorite things." Thomas's throat tightened. "That's very wise of her." "She was good at remembering the soft stuff," Mia added, "like smells and songs and the way her tea always had too much honey." Thomas didn't speak. He simply sat down beside them on the wooden bench and let the silence breathe between them. They weren't asking for anything. Not his wealth, not his approval, just his presence. That night, Thomas stood in front of the old oak armoire in his bedroom. He hadn't opened it in years. Inside was a velvet box. He took it down, opened it slowly. Inside was the matching silver ring, his son's. Its surface was slightly scratched, but the engraving inside was clear. "To Dad. Always yours, Matthew." He walked down the hall and gently knocked on the twins' room door. Mia was reading. Noah was fast asleep, curled into a ball under a blanket too big for him. "I wanted to show you something," Thomas whispered, stepping in. Mia looked up. "What is it?" He sat beside her on the bed and opened the box. "This was your father's ring," he said softly. "He gave it to me the year before he passed. I kept it all this time. I just didn't know I'd be seeing it again, on your grandmother's hand." Mia reached out and traced the engraving. "You look like him," she said. "Not in the face, but when you talk about him." Thomas smiled, a little broken. He had your brother's smile. She nodded, her voice quieter. "And I think he would have liked me." "I know he would have loved you," Thomas said, his voice cracking. Mia leaned her head on his shoulder. That night, long after the kids had gone to bed, Thomas opened his laptop and began to write an email to Samuel. His decision was made. He wanted legal guardianship, not because of obligation, not even because of blood, but because he couldn't imagine his home without them anymore. They had changed the shape of his silence. The days that followed were unlike anything Thomas Reed had experienced in his 61 years. It wasn't the board meetings or press releases that marked his calendar now. It was morning cartoons with Mia and Noah, afternoon hospital visits, and evening meals where laughter replaced business talk. Helen's condition steadily improved at the private hospital, her breathing stronger, her appetite returning. Thomas had hired a private nurse, but he still made it a point to visit every evening, always with the twins in tow and sometimes with Noah's latest drawing or Mia's latest question about the stars. But today, Mia came prepared with more than drawings. As they stepped into the hospital room, she pulled a small velvet pouch from her backpack. She walked straight to Helen's bedside, careful not to jostle the IV line, and placed the pouch beside her pillow. "Boss said this was our family's luck," Mia whispered, "so I want you to have it now that you're feeling better." Thomas watched curiously. When Mia turned to him and unfastened the pouch, his breath caught. It was the same ring, not just similar. The same model, same craftsmanship, same shimmer dulled by time and wear. His heart pounded as she dropped it into his hand. Inside, engraved in tiny cursive, were initials M.R. He knew those letters. Matthew Reed. "My son's ring," Thomas said aloud, barely breathing. "Where did you get this?" Mia hesitated. "It was our mom's. She wore it on a chain, always. Said it reminded her someone once saw the best in her." "Your mom?" Thomas's voice faltered. "Do you know who gave it to her?" She shook her head. "No. She said it belonged to someone very kind. She never told us more." Thomas closed his hand around the ring, overwhelmed. A swirl of old memories stormed to the surface. Matthew's final weeks in rehab, his hope of reconciling with the woman he loved. He never mentioned her name, only said he'd left something precious behind. Now, that something, someone, stood before him in the form of two wide-eyed children who shared their mother's courage and his son's soul. "Your mom," he said carefully, "was her name Rachel?" Mia blinked, stunned. "Yes, Rachel Miles." A silent quake went through him. Thomas sat down beside Helen's bed. "She was my son's partner, the last person he loved before. He passed." Helen, still weak but alert, gave him a long look. "I figured you'd put it together eventually," she said, her voice scratchy but clear. "You knew?" Thomas asked, his voice thick. Helen nodded. "Rachel never wanted charity. She wouldn't come to you. Even when she was dying, she wouldn't ask. She only said, 'If you ever found the kids, you'd know.' That's why she gave them the ring." Thomas leaned forward, voice unsteady. "Why didn't you tell me?" Helen's expression softened. "Would you have believed me then? Or just seen two poor kids from the wrong side of the river?" Silence fell between them, deep and reflective. He didn't argue. He couldn't. Instead, he turned to Mia and Noah, who stood in the corner, quietly holding hands. "I think," he said slowly, "I've just learned I'm not just a friend. I'm your grandfather." Mia's eyes welled up. Noah's jaw dropped. "Wait, like really?" Noah asked, stunned. Thomas opened his arms. "If you'll have me." The two children rushed into his embrace, crashing against him like waves breaking against the shore. He held them fiercely, the ring still clutched tightly in his palm. Later that evening, back at the penthouse, Thomas stood at his study window, staring out at the glowing city below. The skyline he once controlled now seemed irrelevant. Behind him, the living room buzzed with the sounds of children. Noah running down the hall in socks, Mia asking Alexa about the phases of the moon. Thomas turned and walked back to join them. "I have something to ask," he said gently, gathering their attention. "Would it be all right if I became more than just the man who helped your grandma? Would you let me be part of your lives? Officially? Mia nodded solemnly. You already are, but… Yes. Noah shrugged. Only if you learn how to make pancakes without burning them. Thomas laughed, heart swelling. Deal. They all sat together that night on the couch, wrapped in one large blanket, watching a movie no one could follow because the laughter kept interrupting the dialogue. In that moment, Thomas didn't feel like a CEO, or a man with regrets. He felt like something he hadn't been in decades. He felt like home. The morning sun filtered through the tall glass panels of Thomas's penthouse, casting golden light across the sleek marble floors. But for the first time, the place didn't feel cold or cavernous. It felt lived in. A cereal bowl sat forgotten on the kitchen island. A crumpled blanket draped the couch where Noah had fallen asleep with a comic book on his chest. And on the wall, Mia had pinned her latest drawing. Thomas, Helen, Mia, and Noah standing in front of a house with a sign above it. Home. Thomas stared at it for a long moment, his heart tightening in a way he hadn't felt in years. He used to measure value by acquisition. Buildings, contracts, prestige. Now, it was measured in moments. In that picture. In the way Mia now called him Grandpa T, and Noah instinctively reached for his hand in crowded places. But as warm as the moment felt, reality wasn't far behind. That afternoon, while Helen rested and the twins were at art class, Thomas received a call from a soft-spoken woman named Janice Cole, a social worker from the Department of Family Services. I understand you've been caring for Mia and Noah Miles, she began politely. There's been a flagged report. We'll need to meet to discuss legal guardianship. The words dropped like a stone in his chest. Flagged? He repeated. Why? There was a medical alert from the hospital, Janice explained. When a minor's primary caregiver is admitted and a non-parent assumes temporary responsibility, the case is reviewed. It's standard. But I do need to verify your connection to the children. Thomas exhaled. I'm their grandfather. There was a pause. And is that legally documented? His silence answered her question. I'd like to meet in person, Janice said gently. Tomorrow morning, if possible. That evening, over a quiet dinner, Thomas broached the subject. Mia, Noah, he said, carefully setting down his fork. Someone's coming tomorrow. A woman named Janice. She's from the state. She just wants to make sure everything's okay. Like a detective? Noah asked, wide-eyed. Not quite, Thomas smiled. More like someone who helps kids when families need support. Mia's shoulders stiffened. Are they taking us away? No, Thomas said quickly, voice firm. Not if I can help it, but I need to tell them who I really am. That I'm your grandfather, and I'll do whatever it takes to make sure you stay here, where you belong. Mia stared at him for a long beat. Then, quietly, she nodded. Okay. The next morning, Janice Cole arrived at 9:00 a.m. sharp. She was kind-faced and well-prepared, dressed in a professional blazer with a notepad in hand. Thomas welcomed her into the sunlit living room, where a plate of Mia's cookies sat awkwardly untouched on the coffee table. I understand this isn't a typical case, Janice said, scanning the room. But the children speak highly of you. They're extraordinary kids, Thomas replied sincerely. She tilted her head. May I ask why you hadn't filed for guardianship before now? Thomas hesitated. Because I didn't know they existed, and so he told her. About his son Matthew, about Rachel, about the ring, the drawings, the hospital visits, the connection that bloomed before the truth ever fully surfaced. Janice listened, occasionally jotting notes. When he finished, she glanced up. You understand this will need to be substantiated. A DNA test, hospital records, statements. I've already begun, Thomas said, and I'm prepared to do whatever's required. Janice offered a small, respectful nod. There's a temporary custody review in 2 weeks. If everything aligns, we can file for permanent guardianship." That night, after the kids had gone to bed and Helen had fallen asleep with a book on her chest, Thomas stepped onto the terrace, the chill of the evening breeze reminding him how fragile this all was. He pulled his phone from his pocket, hesitating. Then he scrolled down and tapped a name he hadn't called in years. Charles Evans, his lawyer and oldest friend. "Thomas?" Charles answered, surprised. "It's been a while." "I need your help," Thomas said without preamble. "It's about my grandkids. I'm filing for guardianship." A long pause. "I assume there's a story," Charles said, intrigued. "There's a life," Thomas replied quietly, "and I don't want to lose it again." The next days blurred into action. DNA testing, document collection, late-night calls with Helen's old friends to verify timelines. Mia helped organize every paper like it was a treasure hunt. Noah, in his own way, stood guard, checking the front door every hour to make sure no one scary came to take them. And through it all, Thomas began to feel something shift inside. Not just affection or responsibility, but purpose. He was no longer a man running from grief. He was building something. A family reclaimed from silence and scattered pieces. On a quiet Thursday, while walking Mia and Noah home from school, Mia slipped her hand into his and looked up. "Grandpa T?" "Yes, sweetheart?" "When people come and ask questions, will they believe us?" Thomas looked at her, eyes full of a quiet promise. "They won't have to believe you, Mia. They'll believe me. And I'll make sure they know exactly who you are." She smiled softly. "Good, because we belong with you." And in that simple sentence, Thomas felt the ground beneath him settle, steady and true. The week had passed in a flurry of paperwork and progress. Helen's color had returned, her voice a little stronger each day, her wit still sharp despite the long road to recovery. Mia and Noah grew more confident, slipping into the rhythm of school, bedtime stories, and weekend pancake mornings with ease. And for Thomas, the quiet comfort of belonging replaced the echo of old grief. But peace is fragile, especially when tied to secrets. It began with a headline. Reclusive Millionaire CEO. Suddenly seeks guardianship of children. Why now? The article had no byline, just a grainy photo of Thomas walking Mia and Noah home from school. Beneath it, speculation swirled. Was he trying to repair a tarnished reputation? Avoid estate taxes? Hide something worse? Thomas stood in his office, phone in one hand, the newspaper trembling in the other. His assistant, Lillian, hovered at the door. "It hit 3 major outlets this morning, and someone leaked your DNA request to the lab." Thomas's jaw clenched. Someone with motive. And then the call came. "Hello, Thomas," the voice purred on the line. He hadn't heard that voice in over a decade. "Vanessa," he said slowly. Rachel's half-sister. The woman who had vanished after the funeral, leaving a trail of bitterness and cold threats in her wake. The woman who had always resented Thomas for cutting her off after discovering she'd embezzled money from Rachel's estate. "I see you've stumbled into fatherhood," Vanessa continued, her voice sweet and venomous. "Or should I say, grandfatherhood? What do you want?" "Just what's fair," she said silkily. "See, after Rachel died, those kids were technically my responsibility, but no one came looking, and now you think you can just swoop in with your billions and play savior?" "They're not a game," Thomas said, his tone hardening. "No," she agreed, "but they are leverage." That word, leverage, turned his blood cold. "I've filed a custody motion," she added casually, "claiming next of kin rights. After all, Rachel was my sister." "You abandoned them." "Prove it," Vanessa said cheerfully. "Let's see who the court believes. The blood aunt who was never given a chance, or the rich man trying to rewrite history." She hung up before he could speak. Thomas stood frozen. His lungs burned with a silent fury. He thought they'd finally outrun the past. But it had found them, wearing lipstick and smiling like a vulture. That evening, Thomas sat Mia and Noah down gently. "There's something I have to tell you," he began, choosing each word with care. "Your mom had a sister. Her name is Vanessa. She's filed something with the court. She wants to take over custody." Noah looked confused. "But we don't even know her." Mia's eyes darkened. "She used to visit when Mom was sick, but then she stopped coming. Mom said she only cared about money." Thomas nodded slowly. "I'm going to fight this. I'm not letting anyone take you away." Mia reached across the table and took his hand. "We trust you." Later that night, Thomas met with Charles, his attorney. "She has no legal standing," Charles said, flipping through the documents. "But if she convinces the judge the kids are better off with blood family, especially someone who claims she was denied access, you could lose temporary custody." "Then we make sure the court knows the truth," Thomas said firmly. "Every lie she's told, every time she walked away, we lay it bare." Charles nodded. "We'll need statements from Helen, from the children, and from anyone else who witnessed her neglect." Over the next few days, Thomas worked tirelessly. He sat with Helen, carefully helping her recount the visits Vanessa never made. He gathered records, emails from Rachel, police reports about Vanessa's fraud, medical records showing she refused to pay for Rachel's care. Meanwhile, Sophie, the court-appointed advocate, met privately with Mia and Noah. When she returned, she looked at Thomas, her expression unreadable. "They love you," she said simply. "Mia said she feels safe for the first time. Noah says you're teaching him to throw a baseball like his dad did in the stories. They want to stay. I'll be recommending that." Thomas swallowed hard, his heart swelling. The night before the hearing, he sat on the floor with the twins, helping Noah build a Lego rocket ship. Mia drew nearby, humming softly. At one point, she looked up and said, "Grandpa T?" "Yes, honey?" "If we have to go, will you still come find us?" He froze. "I'm not letting that happen," he said, voice low. "But if it did, I'd search the ends of the earth for you. I'd never stop." She nodded solemnly. "Okay." And then she did something Thomas hadn't expected. She climbed into his lap and curled against his chest. "Then I won't be scared." The courtroom was nothing like the boardrooms Thomas Reed was used to. Here, there were no quarterly earnings, no market projections, no elegant presentations. Just truth, raw, unpolished, and contested. The pale morning sun filtered through tall windows, casting light across the polished oak benches. Thomas sat quietly beside his lawyer, Charles, adjusting his cufflinks out of habit. Mia and Noah waited outside with Helen, accompanied by Sophie, their court advocate. Vanessa strutted into the courtroom in a tailored suit, her expression smug and rehearsed. She offered Thomas a smirk as she passed, as if this were just another game of power and optics. But Thomas wasn't playing anymore. He was here to win, not for ego, but for them. "All rise," the bailiff announced. Judge Karen Whitmore entered, dignified and focused, her presence commanding silence. The hearing began. Vanessa's attorney painted her as a concerned aunt denied access to her sister's children, unfairly cast aside by a grieving billionaire. They used carefully selected statements from neighbors who vaguely remembered Vanessa visiting once, years ago. They hinted that Thomas, despite his wealth, was trying to rewrite the past out of guilt. When Vanessa took the stand, she dabbed at her eyes with a silk handkerchief. "My sister Rachel and I were close," she said sweetly. "We fought, yes, but what siblings don't? When she got sick, I begged her to come live with me, but she insisted on staying in that crumbling apartment with her pride, and when she passed, I tried to find the kids, really I did." "Where did you look?" Charles asked, rising for cross-examination. Vanessa blinked. "Excuse me? You said you looked for Mia and Noah. Where did you look?" She fumbled. "Social media. I reached out to shelters, made calls." "Any records of those efforts?" Silence. "Did you contact child services, police, hospitals?" More silence. "Isn't it true," Charles continued, "that you were offered money by Thomas Reed years ago to leave Rachel's estate quietly, and that you took it?" Objection. Sustained. But the damage was done. Next, Helen took the stand, frail but clear-eyed. "Vanessa visited once," she said firmly. "Years ago. She stayed 10 minutes. When Rachel was at her weakest, Vanessa disappeared. I raised those children from the moment their mother passed." Thomas watched her speak with quiet awe. She had given so much without complaint. She had fought for those kids long before he knew they existed. When it was Thomas's turn, he stood tall, not as a CEO, but as a man who had learned what truly mattered. "I met Mia and Noah on a rainy afternoon," he began. "They came to my office with handmade drawings asking to help save their grandmother, not asking for charity, offering their talent, their time, their hearts. I've built empires, presided over billion-dollar negotiations, but nothing has humbled me more than that moment." He paused, voice tightening. "I lost my son years ago. Grief hollowed me out, but those two, they brought life back into this tired soul. They're not a burden, they're not an image problem. They're my family now, and I will protect them with everything I am." He stepped down, returning to his seat, breath heavy with emotion. Finally, Sophie, the court-appointed advocate, addressed the judge. "I've spoken extensively with Mia and Noah. They're bright, kind, incredibly resilient, and they've found safety and healing with Mr. Reed. They call him Grandpa T. They trust him. They feel seen. I recommend, without hesitation, that he be granted permanent guardianship." Judge Whitmore reviewed the files slowly. The room held its collective breath. After a long pause, she looked up. "Vanessa Hughes," she said, her tone steely. "You abandoned these children at their most vulnerable. You provided no tangible support, no consistent presence. This court sees through your motivations." She turned to Thomas. "Mr. Reed, you've demonstrated not only the capacity but the devotion required of a guardian. It is the judgment of this court to award full legal guardianship of Mia and Noah to you, effective immediately." Gasps echoed. Mia and Noah, waiting in the hallway, burst into the courtroom before the bailiff could stop them. We heard! Noah shouted, running into Thomas's arms. Mia followed, tears streaming. Vanessa stormed out in silence, her world crumbling as swiftly as she had tried to seize theirs. Thomas knelt to their level, voice cracking. "We're together now, for good." Mia reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, wrinkled drawing. "This was the first one I gave you," she whispered. "You kept your promise." He took the drawing and kissed her forehead. "You kept mine too." And in that moment, surrounded by unconditional love, Thomas realized something profound. The legacy he'd leave behind wouldn't be measured in buildings or bank accounts. It would be drawn in crayons, sung in bedtime lullabies, and etched into the hearts of two children who had saved him as much as he had saved them. The late afternoon sun poured gently through the wide bay windows of Thomas Reed's newly purchased home, a craftsman-style two-story nestled in a quiet Austin neighborhood full of oaks and lazy cicadas. But inside, the house buzzed with a different kind of energy, laughter, joy, life. Mia tiptoed across the hardwood floor, balancing a tray of orange juice and toast, while Noah chased her around the couch, wielding a spoon like a knight's sword. "Careful, Sir Noah." Thomas chuckled from the kitchen, stirring oatmeal with more care than precision. "If you break another vase, I'm blaming the dragon." Noah grinned. Dragons don't like oatmeal. And neither do boys who skip breakfast. Helen chimed in gently, seated on a padded armchair near the fireplace, her face still pale but glowing with recovery. A soft blanket covered her lap, and her hands rested peacefully over the new prescription Thomas had rushed to pick up that morning. It had been only a week since the court's decision, but the transformation was visible. The fear in Mia's eyes had softened into curiosity. Noah's silence had turned into questions, so many questions. And Helen. Helen had stopped apologizing for being alive. That morning, as they all gathered at the dining table Thomas had ordered just 3 days prior, a strange but comforting rhythm had begun to take shape. Mia pushed a bowl of cut fruit toward Helen. Grandpa Thomas peeled the oranges himself. We saw him. Helen smiled. Then they must be extra sweet. I used to run companies, Thomas said dryly. Now I run a fruit peeler. Noah laughed, then looked serious. Are we, really staying here? Thomas leaned forward, setting down his mug. His voice dropped with careful sincerity. You're not just staying, buddy. This is your home now, for good. Mia bit her lip. Even after school starts? Even if we make messes? Especially then, Thomas replied warmly. This house is yours to grow in, even if it gets messy. Helen's eyes welled. She whispered, Thank you, Thomas. You gave us more than shelter. You gave us dignity again. Thomas reached for her hand and squeezed it. You gave it to them first. I'm just trying to keep up. Later that afternoon, while Helen napped, Thomas stood with Mia and Noah in the backyard. The overgrown grass had turned golden at the edges, but it didn't matter. The kids ran barefoot, chasing each other around a tree that Thomas had already planned to hang a tire swing on. As he watched, a feeling long forgotten crept into his chest. Contentment. Not the kind that comes from success, but the quiet kind that whispers you're exactly where you're meant to be. Hey, Grandpa T, Mia called, breathless and giggling. Can we build a tree house? Thomas blinked. A tree house? I haven't built one of those since... His voice trailed. Since Ryan, his son. The ache of memory threatened to return, but this time it was softer, more forgiving. He knelt beside Mia and Noah. We'll build the best one in Texas. Deal? Both kids shrieked and hugged him tightly, nearly knocking him into the grass. He didn't mind. That night, Thomas sat on the edge of Mia's bed as she stared at the glow-in-the-dark stars they had just finished sticking to the ceiling. Do you think my mom can see us? She asked, voice barely above a whisper. Thomas swallowed hard, nodding slowly. I do, and I think she's proud of how brave you are, of how much love you carry. Mia turned toward him. She used to say when I feel safe, it's because someone kind is near. Thomas placed a hand on her shoulder. Then you should always feel safe now. Down the hall, Noah had already fallen asleep holding a worn baseball Thomas had given him, one that once belonged to Ryan. Helen stood quietly in the doorway of her own room, watching all of it unfold. You've changed everything, she whispered later in the kitchen. You know that, don't you? Thomas shook his head humbly. They changed me. They filled something I didn't even know was missing. Helen rested her hand on his arm. Then maybe you were never lost. Just waiting. He looked down at her gently. And now? Now, she said, her voice strong despite its softness, you're found. That evening, as the house dimmed into a lullaby of breathing and distant dreams, Thomas stood by the living room window and looked out at the quiet street. He didn't see deals. He didn't see deadlines. He saw a porch where stories would be told, a hallway that would echo with laughter, and rooms where pain would be replaced by peace. The world outside still turned, loud and ruthless. But inside this home, there was warmth. There was hope. There was family. The morning began with the sunlight spilling across the breakfast table, catching the edges of the mismatched bowls filled with cereal. Noah had discovered chocolate milk and insisted it made the best breakfast ever. Mia was carefully braiding her doll's hair beside her plate while Helen hummed a quiet tune from her seat near the window, wrapped in a knit shawl Thomas had left on her chair. Thomas stood in the kitchen doorway, holding his coffee like a lifeline, observing it all as though trying to memorize the rhythm of a life he had never expected to live. His chest tightened, not from stress, but from something quieter, fuller. A knock at the door broke the moment. He opened it to find a sharply dressed woman with a badge clipped to her coat pocket. "Mr. Reed?" "Yes." "Rachel Langston. I'm with Child Protective Services." Her tone was professional, but her expression was gentle. "I'd like to talk with you about Mia and Noah." Thomas led her to the living room, his heart thudding just slightly faster. The twins peeked in from the hallway, sensing the shift in energy. Rachel glanced at her clipboard. "We've received several reports, from the hospital, from the school counselor, regarding your involvement in the children's lives. They're all positive, but because Helen Bennett is not yet medically cleared for full guardianship, we're required to consider long-term alternatives." Thomas nodded slowly. "I understand." Rachel leaned forward. "Mr. Reed, I have to ask, do you intend to pursue legal guardianship of Mia and Noah?" Thomas didn't answer right away. He glanced toward the hallway, where the kids had now fully stepped into view, standing shoulder to shoulder. "I do," he said finally, firmly. "I want to be a permanent part of their lives. I want them to have more than just a roof over their heads. I want them to have a future." Rachel's eyes softened. "Then let's begin the process. I'll need to conduct a formal home visit, review your background, and confirm your capacity to provide a stable environment." Thomas smiled, something humble and bright. "You're welcome to stay for dinner. That should tell you everything." That night, as the sun lowered behind the hills, Thomas gathered the children in the living room. "I want to ask you both something," he said carefully. "It's important." Mia tilted her head. "Is it about the treehouse? Because we want one with windows." Thomas chuckled. "That too. But this is bigger. I talked to a lady today about becoming your legal guardian." Noah blinked. "What's that mean?" "It means," Thomas said gently, "that I would be more than just someone who helps. I'd be responsible for you, like your grandpa, on paper, forever." Mia looked at her brother, then at Thomas. "But what about Grandma Helen? She'll always be here. This doesn't take anything away from her, it just adds something more, something official, something permanent." The room went quiet. Finally, Noah whispered, "Does that mean we're really your family?" Thomas nodded. "You already are. This would just make sure no one could ever take that away." Mia climbed into his lap, laying her head against his chest. "Then yes." Noah followed, curling beside them. "Okay, but I still want the treehouse." Thomas laughed, his eyes wet. "It's a deal." Days turned into weeks as the paperwork moved forward. Home visits were conducted. Letters of recommendation from Helen's doctors and the children's teachers flowed in. Thomas sat through each meeting, every fingerprint scan and background check with the patience of a man who had made his choice and would not waver. One morning, a formal envelope arrived. Inside, stamped and signed, confirmation of Thomas Reed's guardianship over Mia and Noah Bennett. He stood in the doorway of the twins' room, watching them play with mismatched socks on their hands like puppets. "I have something to tell you," he said. They both looked up. "It's official. You're stuck with me." Noah jumped into his arms. "Yes," Mia giggled. "Forever and ever?" "Forever," Thomas whispered. Later that evening, as Helen lit candles for dinner, her hands no longer trembling with illness but steady with peace, she paused to look at Thomas. "They're safe now," she said, her voice soft but certain. "Because of you." He shook his head. "Because of all of us. We did this together." She reached for his hand. You've given them more than a home. You've given them something I didn't know how to give, hope." Thomas squeezed her fingers gently, and they gave me the same thing in return. That night, the twins drew a picture. Thomas with wild gray hair and a superhero cape, standing in front of a crooked treehouse. Underneath, written in shaky handwriting, "Our forever home." And, for the first time in years, Thomas Reed felt complete. A soft breeze rustled through the early spring leaves as Thomas adjusted the checkered tablecloth outside the small cottage he had renovated for Helen, Mia, and Noah. The once crumbling porch had been rebuilt with care, its white railing now wrapped with twinkle lights that flickered like fireflies. The garden, once overgrown, now bloomed with color. Mia's sunflowers in neat rows, Noah's vegetable patch full of determined little sprouts. Today wasn't just any day. It was Helen's birthday. And more than that, it was a celebration of survival, of second chances, and of the family they had chosen to build together. Thomas walked back inside where the twins were arguing playfully over frosting, colors. "Noah, blue doesn't go on a strawberry cake," Mia insisted, hands on her hips. "Why not? Grandma likes the sky. Blue's like the sky," he countered. Helen sat at the kitchen table, her eyes twinkling with amusement. "Let them mix it, Mia. Sky and strawberries don't sound so bad together." Thomas chuckled, crossing to help. "Let's just make sure there's enough frosting for the cake, and not just the counter." Mia grinned and leaned against him. "Do you think she'll like our surprise?" "I think she's going to cry," he said gently, in a good way. Helen's recovery had been steady. With proper treatment, nutritious meals, and no more sleepless nights worrying about rent, she was herself again, sharp, warm, and endlessly grateful. She had insisted on staying in the little cottage rather than moving to Thomas's penthouse. "The city is for CEOs," she'd said. "This place, this is where grandchildren belong." And so Thomas made it a home, visiting daily, often staying over, sometimes falling asleep on the couch with a storybook in one hand and Noah curled against his chest. Later that evening, just as the sun dipped low over the tree line, casting golden light across the backyard, Helen stepped out onto the porch. She wore a soft lilac dress, a gift from Mia, and a delicate gold pin from Noah, hand-shaped like a leaf. "All right," she said, hands outstretched. "What are you all up to?" The twins led her down the small stone path lined with mason jar candles toward the garden. At the center was a wooden bench carved by Thomas himself. On it, painted in vibrant childlike lettering, Grandma's magic spot. But what drew her breath away wasn't the bench. It was the painting. On a canvas, nearly as tall as Mia, a bright, colorful landscape stretched wide, a field of wildflowers beneath a blue sky with floating hearts. In the middle stood 3 figures holding hands. One was unmistakably Helen, the other 2, Mia and Noah. In the corner, painted in smaller strokes, stood a 4th figure, a man with graying hair and kind eyes, his arm extended protectively around them all. Helen's hand flew to her mouth. "You did this?" Mia nodded solemnly. "For everything." Noah added, "We're your family. He's ours now, too." Thomas knelt beside them, voice thick. "I didn't know what I was missing until I met you." Helen wiped a tear. "I didn't think I'd see a day like this. My babies. With a future." They ate dinner on the porch, laughter echoing under the soft hum of string lights. And when the cake arrived, sky blue frosting streaked with strawberry swirls, Helen declared it absolutely perfect. Later, as the twins got ready for bed, Thomas sat at the edge of the porch, watching the stars blink into the night sky. Helen joined him, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders. "You've given them more than just shelter," she said quietly. "You gave them back their joy." "I think they gave that to me," he replied honestly. She turned toward him. "You'll stay, right? Even after they grow up? Even when the world pulls at you again?" Thomas looked toward the open window, where the soft sound of Mia's lullaby drifted through. "I'm not going anywhere," he whispered. This is where I belong." Just then, the twins padded back outside in their pajamas, barefoot on the cool wood. Mia held something in her hand, a small, wrapped package. "We made you something," she said, placing it in Thomas's lap. Inside was a keychain carved from wood, in the shape of a tiny house. Noah pointed. "It's got our names. See? One side says Mia and Noah. The other side says home." Thomas's voice caught. "I'll keep this forever." Mia climbed into his lap. "Promise?" He wrapped his arms around her and her brother. "With all my heart." Above them, the stars shimmered. Inside, the painting waited on its easel, and beside them, Helen sat with a smile only peace can bring. They had found each other through brokenness, through drawings and faith and a ring with too many memories. And together, they had built something stronger than any foundation Thomas had ever poured for a skyscraper. They had built a home.